Hello guys, got a video here for you today on the Red Wolf. Now in this one what we're going to be doing is taking it apart. There's a few little upgrades I want to make inside of this thing, so I thought I'd bring you along as we take it apart. Red Wolf's one of them guns that you should really leave alone unless you really need to change something. I'm quite happy to take mine apart, and I understand that if I break anything inside I'm going to have to replace it. So if you're not happy to do either of those things, then just leave it alone. Right then, one thing I will mention before we start is that before you work on the rifle, you need to disconnect the battery 24 hours before you start working on the rifle. The Red Wolf control board fitted in the rifle has a number of large capacitors in them, and they do store some charge for quite a long time. So it's always best to disconnect the battery a good day before to give them capacitor time to discharge. Right then, now that that's out of the way, we can start. So first I'll remove the battery, and that's in this little cavity here. So pull the battery out. We'll leave this open as we do need to feed the battery wire back through the rifle in a minute. Next I'll take the stock off, and that's done with an 8mm Allen key in this bottom screw here. And then when we remove the stock we need to make sure this little battery terminal here doesn't get caught up as we pull the stock off. Just guide it through. Now we have the stock. Right then, now that that's off, things start to get a little different between me and you. What I've done is I've fitted a removable bottle valve. This is actually the M3 regulator bottle valve in the front here. So I can just disconnect my bottle like I would on an FX rifle. So I'm going to do that now. However, if you have the standard bottle valve, what you need to do is undo the Foster fitting at the bottom here. Just need to crack it loose, keep going until you start to hear the rifle hissing. Because the Red Wolf isn't fitted with a one-way valve in the bottle, you will lose all the air out of the entire system. But once the hissing stops coming from out there, undo it a couple more turns, make sure all the air's out the rifle, then you can continue. Right then, next we'll take the shroud off, and that's done with a 2.5mm Allen key in either side. Remove the two little grub screws, and then the shroud can be pulled off. Once the shroud's off, we can undo these two little grub screws on top here, and that's done with a 2mm Allen key. These ones don't need to come out all the way, they just need to come so that you can remove the little aluminium part at the end there. Right then, with that off, I'm going to remove my pick rail. This is one that I've put on the rifle, so it's probably not fitted on your one, but I'm just going to remove it with the 3 screws on the top here. With the pick rail off, I'm going to take my barrel out. That's done with two 2.5mm Allen screws here and at the back there. Then we can just slide the barrel out. This one is a 12mm shank, as are most of the sub 12 pound models. However, the larger calibers and the high power models use a 14mm shank. So there it is. And this is the Art Poly barrel. A very nice barrel indeed. I should mention now that if you wanted to just take the entire barrel out without bothering taking the shroud off, you could just undo these 2 screws and pull the whole assembly out. Next what we'll do is take the 2 plastic covers off and the trigger assembly. Your one might have different screws in them. Normally these come with little round cheese head screws, but I swap them out as I hate them style screws, and I just put some nice cap heads in their place. So I'm going to use a 2.5mm Allen key. And once we've done that, we can expose the board. I will do a close-up of the board, but for now I'm just going to undo these 2 screws in here. And what this does is disconnect the coil from the board. So just undo them a few turns. They're only terminal wires, so they don't need to be taken all the way out. Then with a 5mm Allen key in the base here, we take the trigger plate off. Your trigger plate may look a little different, I made this one, but it seems to work okay. So we'll just pull that off, just being careful of the core wires there. Alright, now at this stage we can unhook the pressure sensor. Now it may be tempting to pull on the wires, but that's often not the best case. You can pull these wires out and you don't want to be resoldering them. So the best course of action is to get your fingernail under one side of the connection and just lever it up. May take a couple tries, but it will eventually come up. If you are struggling at this point, you can take the other side of the plastic cover off and then get more on the side of it. But I'm going to leave this assembly alone for now, and I'll bring it back in a minute when we take it apart further. Right then, that's all the electronic components separated from the rifle. So we can begin taking apart the action of the rifle. So I'm going to start at the back, then work forward. Now there is an order to do this, and there's a couple things to watch out for, so I'll explain them as we go. First, we're going to take out this screw here, and in my case it's a 3mm. Those of you who don't know, this block I bought as just a block, and then I made all the components I could and bought the rest. So there's a few things on the rifle that aren't standard to Daystates normally, and this screw is one of them. Right, with that screw out, we can pull back gently, and being careful of this little bush here, we can pull back the pellet probe. If you put the rifle on safe, you can pull the pellet probe all the way out. Like that. There is the pellet probe assembly. I will take this apart further in a minute. Right, now at this stage there's a very important thing we need to do. Firstly, we need to get rid of that ball bearing, which is there. If you didn't see what I've done there, I just flicked it onto from safe to fire. Now this is the critical part. In the back here, just under this screw, there's a very small spring and ball bearing. We need to get them out before we take this safety assembly off, or they may end up trapped in the rifle when you go to remove the safety. So the easiest way I've found to get this spring out is with a Allen key and a stack of magnets on it. So this is a 50 thou Allen key, and what we're going to do is just poke it in the hole. Then pull the spring out like so. As you can see there, very small indeed. So we'll stick that safely to one side, and then we still have a ball bearing in the base there, so we take that out the same way too. Now the ball bearing in here sometimes gets glued in with a little bit of grease, so what sometimes works is touching the Allen key on the ball bearing, snapping the magnets on, and then pulling like that. And that just pulls the ball bearing out, and then it sticks on the end of the magnets like that. That operation is critical before you take the safety off. That little spring half goes into the safety mechanism and half goes into the block. If you undo these two screws and try and take the safety out without taking that spring out, it will get wedged in there and you'll never be able to get it out. It's one of them things that if you aren't looking for it, it's going to catch you out, so just bear that in mind. Right then, before we go too much further, I'll just quickly take apart the pellet probe assembly. So there's not much to this, just this little screw here with a flat bladed screwdriver. And there the screw is, small little thing. Stick that to one side, and then here's the pellet probe. Not much to these, this is one I made myself, and it works quite nicely. Next I'll just push the bush out, just so it doesn't get lost. There it is there. Right then, next we'll take this little bolt out. Now I will say now that there is a spring and a ball back there, so just be very careful as you take it out. And these can be Loctited in. I've already had mine apart once before. There's the pin. And there's the ball. And there's the arm. The lever arm and the ball bearing. And then the spring is still in the body. So I'll just pull that out. And there it is there. That was just in that hole there. Right, that's the arm fully disassembled. I could take the cocking arm off, but you really shouldn't need me to tell you how to get that off. So I'll stick this assembly to one side. Now then, next up is the safety. Now on my rifle, I obviously just bought it as a block and it didn't come with these screws installed. Normally, the Daystates have these little anti-tamper screws and they're 3 prongs in the end there, and obviously they won't fit a standard hex key. The only way I've found to get these out is by putting a 1mm drill bit in each of the holes, getting some pliers and twisting them. They're normally not done up really tight, so that trick normally works on them, but you obviously have to be really careful if you do go down that route, as if you slip with the drill bits they're just going to scratch the block to pieces. But my one didn't come with them, and we've got some nice standard hex heads in there. We'll undo these. This is with a 2mm Allen key. And then once one side's done, light amount of pressure on the back there, and we take the other screw out, and then we can pull the safety out. Now there's a little trick to it. What you have to do is put it on fire and then pull this pin up a little bit. That allows you to pull the whole safety assembly back. It's just that pin there stops the safety from flying out the back. So we'll stick the safety assembly to one side and continue on with the block. That's the hammer. That's the dampener O-ring. On the older models they used to have this little wave ring, which is a sprung piece of steel. All this does is absorb some of the vibration as the hammer flies back and forward. So newer ones come with an O-ring, older ones had a wave ring. Next is a little Delrin spacer piece, this piece here. Nothing much to that. And then we have the valve core. Now the valve core, what we have to do is bend this wire down so it fits through this hole here. Wires are quite delicate, so just be careful. And with a Allen key, you can just poke them through the hole like that, and then shake the whole assembly out the back. I've got a little piece of nylon that I just used to push out the back. Now it's tempting to pull on this, but obviously you can't. They're only wires, so if you give them a good tug, there's a good chance you're going to pull the wires apart. But you should be able to remove the valve core pretty easily, like that. Then we have the steel ring behind it, and that's just a reinforcing ring so the hammer doesn't hit the aluminium of the block. And I'm pretty sure that's another piece I made myself. But I'll stick this to one side. And then there's the valve coil. It's just a simple electromagnet. The hammers are steel, so as the hammer goes through and the coil is energized, it pulls the hammer through and that strikes the valve like so. Pretty simple stuff, but it works amazingly well. And then we can concentrate on the front of the rifle. Right then, my front valve's a little different from your one, but it attaches in exactly the same way. So all we need to do is loosen these 4 screws and these 2 at the back, and then we should be able to just undo most of them by hand. While I'm undoing this, I'll just tell you a little bit about the block. It's got a M3 front valve on it, so it is regulated. The Daystates from the factory aren't regulated, they are electronically regulated, which means instead of the valve pressure being regulated, they actually regulate the hammer strike. But for this one we put the M3 regulator on the front there, and it's regulated both ways now. Seems to work quite well. A little more testing needs to be done to it, but the initial results are really quite promising. Now I've left this screw in for a reason. It's just a safety measure. Even though the rifle is fully degassed, when you take this front valve off you sometimes get a little pop. We didn't get it that time, but sometimes you do. And then here's the front valve. There's a good look at it there. Uses a standard Daystate Foster fill, M3 front, and the same connection on the back here. A little different on my one, I made this removable, just so it's easier to manufacture, and at some point, you never know, I might experiment with the size of this hole here. But it seems to work quite well, and for a prototype it's really quite interesting. And now we can take out the valve. So this is slightly different on FAC and sub 12. This is a sub 12 valve and spring. The FAC valve and spring are a bit beefier. Now before we can get the brass valve core out, what we need to do is take the indexing pin off. Now this model is fitted with a magazine that's indexed rather than a spring-loaded magazine. So this is the pin that makes that action. So the top plate comes off. There's a spring. The actuating pin. And then a little steel insert in here. What I've found is if you just use some nice pliers, put them in the hole and then expand the pliers, you can pull the steel unit out as one piece, like that. There is an O-ring in the bottom there, so just be careful of that. Right, with that removed, we can push the valve core out. Now the valve core pulls out from this way, so we have to push on it from this side. Again, I'm just going to be using my little nylon rod, giving it a push, and it should come out all the way. There it is there. There is an O-ring on the back, so be careful. But there is a sub 12 valve core. Right then, that's the block pretty much all taken apart. The last thing we'll take off is this little cover plate here. That's done with a 2mm Allen key in these two screw holes here. You don't take these all the way out, all you do is unscrew them so that they're loose, and then the plate can be pulled out like that. Your one may have a slightly different finish. This is the one I made. Right then, that's about it for the block. We could, if we wanted to, take the pressure sensor off. I'm not going to, as I did do this up quite tight, but they do tend to get a little damaged when you try and remove them. They only have one sealing surface, and that's that doughty washer in between the sensor and the body. So if you did have a leak there, it'd be a very easy fix. But there we go, that's a full Red Wolf block disassembled. These are the holes I drilled in it to put the Picatinny rail on it. Right, so I'll bring back the board. Okay then, so here's the board, and we'll just take it all apart and have it as a separate unit. So first of all, I'm going to remove the plugs. That's simply done by getting either side of the plug and levering it out. Again, you don't want to be pulling on the cables, they are very thin and you might end up damaging one of the wires. So no pulling on the wires. That one was the trigger, and the trigger one goes at the front here. It's also labelled trig. So next one we'll take out is this one. And this one is the safety. And the last one is the battery. However, we can leave the battery one in until we take the other side off and separate the board from the trigger housing. So again, 2.5mm Allen key. Undo these screws. And then very, very carefully lift off the trigger plate to reveal the board. We'll set this to one side. There is a little more we can disassemble from it. And here's the board. This little white cover piece is something I made. Usually the Red Wolves use a clear piece, but this is just an insulating layer so that there's not a short circuit between the board and the trigger unit. And then the board can be lifted out. We'll stick the plastic cover to one side, and then the battery terminal can be just pulled off like we did the other two. Grabbing the plastic terminal, not the wires. So there's the board. This board has been upgraded, so it's running the latest software. Bit of a pain to do, but the new software just gives you some more options with some of the settings on the rifle. The backlight can be switched on longer or permanently, and you also have a shot counter and a few other nice little bits and pieces. But there's the board there, and very lastly, here's the trigger unit. We just take this apart, use a 3mm Allen key in these two screws here. That's the first one, the second one at the back. Being careful of the trigger as it does have a little spring in it, but there's the trigger unit there. Really not a complicated thing, and the trigger just actuates this little switch here. Now, like I said before, I did make this plate, so it might be a little different from your one. And the safety button here is a little different as my one uses longer leads than the standard, but this is the only one I could find. There it is there. I won't bother taking these out, but if you did want to take them out, these two screws for the trigger plate, and the trigger goes that way in, and the safety one, again ramp facing forward, these two nuts here, and the safety can be adjusted up and down so that it's in the right position as the bar comes down and hits it. This is the safety mechanism, and as we flick this lever back and forward, pin at the end there rises and falls. So in the fire position it's up and out the way, then in the safe position the pole drops down and pushes this switch, stopping the rifle from being fired. Right then guys, that's going to about do it for this one. Hope you found that interesting, and in the next video we'll be rebuilding it. So thanks for watching guys, I'll see you in the next one.